Welcome to the Church of Mabus radio show. It's 7:07 p.m. Central. This is United Public Radio 107.7 FM New Orleans. And we got Jay McNicholas here with us tonight. And let's see, we also, our guest is Richard Grossinger. Uh, and it's good to have him back. He's been on before. And I'm in one of his books with a written interview, so I've known Richard for a good while. His new book is Dreamtimes and Thoughtforms, Cosmogenesis, Cosmogenesis from the Big Bang to Octopus and Crow Intelligence to UFOs. So, love the cover too. It's really cool. And you can't go wrong with crows and octopuses either. That's for sure. but one thing I just want to mention real quick, some things in the news. I'm not going to be long at all with this. Anne Hesh passed away. She was an actress. Yeah, she just ran her car on cocaine into a house that caught on fire, and she just, I guess, died. She was on like life support or something. Then I just saw, I don't read Salman Rushdie or whatever, but I've seen him on Bill Maher and stuff. He was just stabbed in the neck at something and sent to the hospital, which I know he wrote some book, The Satanic Verses. I'm not sure what the hell that is. I don't think he's a Satanist. I don't know. I've never read it, but it's supposed to it upset a lot of like Muhammad situations.
A lot of Muslims did not like that book.
I've never read it, but I've seen him on Bill Maher. But other than that, I don't know much about him. But just crazy. And then, of course, Fuhrer Shipburg von Trumpeldooch was raided. That people are going crazy about that. And like I've seen it before it's news, they're going crazy over that. Some guy went to the FBI building and fired a nail gun at it. Like, how stupid you got to be to do that? But complete insanity. Anyway, let's get to our guests. I don't like to talk about news too much, but sometimes you just gotta. It's good to have you here, Richard. It's great for your return and good to connect. And how you doing?
Okay, yeah. When you mentioned the news, I did have the strange sense today of, now is this the real news? Which I've had at times before, but it really struck me today. Did all these things happen? And it's sort of similar to the things you mentioned. And I've been thinking a lot more recently, and sometimes it's hard to tell whether it's oneself or the world, that that we're just in a different place now, that we've shifted where we are. And maybe it's like we locate ourselves in the solar system, and then the solar system in the galaxy, and the galaxy in the cluster of galaxies. But all of that is kind of moving in relationship to each other and in relationship to something which is hard for us to imagine or know what it is, or if that is just empty space, or if we're moving through some sort of even in physical space-time, whether we're moving through different dimensions. And these things that are arising are like I don't know, like little tiny symptoms of the shift. Um, I mean, maybe I'm forcing it. It's more a feeling, just feeling like this sometimes. There's certainly bigger things, like like the whole range of things that have happened the last few years, from the pandemic to the invasion of Ukraine, um, to just the very powerful polarization of things. I'm reminded of the definition of the astral realm, which is that the astral, which hangs down kind of over us and through us, that it's polarized, and when we try and unpolarize it by smoothing it out, it's simply the part of it we're working with polarizes, and then that a part of that polarizes. And people are always having to deal with the way opposites come up for them. And I don't know, I'm just kind of feeling my way into this. I don't know. I
I
don't have
understand.
a path or a clue. I'm just kind of. I'll wait for you to take the
Yeah,
lead
you're
here.
doing good. I understand what you mean. I mean, things definitely are getting weirder, but I definitely hope there's a positive nexus where we hit some kind of momentum that's better than what we're seeing in the world. Because I mean, the Ukraine thing is horrific. I saw Sean Penn on the news and some footage of him going over there, and just that whole scenario is horrific. That I mean, I don't want to get into it too heavily, but that Putin basically thinks it's okay to kill everyone there because there's Nazis. By that logic, we would all be dead too, you know, because we have Nazis here, unfortunately. So, and then he's threatening to bomb Ireland and us, and just crazy. Like something, something hit a switch, and then China and Taiwan and all that. And then, not to mention, crazy COVID. That's just been insane. So I guess one thing we could start off with, what is some of the I know you get into COVID dream animals. What could you tell us about that? Is that like animal allies, like shamanic?
Yeah, kind of. I This book, Dreamtimes and Thoughtforms, was at one point a different book. It was a larger collection of things in which I actually had sections on COVID and cancel culture and the whole political situation, and ultimately a chapter on Ukraine. And because I'm working with inner traditions now, um, there was there was a kind of desire to pull out the esoteric parts of that book and make a different book. So I took the other part. I've renamed The Return of the Tower of Babel, um, and it's about QAnon and COVID and chaos magic, the use of chaos magic in politics. Um, and when I pulled it out, I decided to take the COVID animals out of the COVID section and put them in this book, um, which in which I was really trying to um, understand the flow of different consciousnesses through the system. And the COVID animals, I think I picked out crows and tardigrades and elephants and um, pigeons and turtles. And in a way, I was just being playful by calling them COVID animals, but I was also saying that COVID has caused us to look at the natural world differently. And when we look at the natural world differently, these animals, and it certainly includes crows and octopuses, take on a life that's much more like another reality that we've been ignoring, just like COVID brings into the world a kind of different framing than we've had thus far. It shifted the framing, and the civilization is so locked down. It's so full of its own concepts and even anti-concepts that at a certain point you say, no, no, there's all sorts of other stuff happening, and we keep wedging it into the system. Um, and I, I was looking actually, I just got this book myself, and I was looking at it and struck by more than anything the fact that at least for me, I write books in sort of spells or trances. And I enter the world of that particular trance. And then things come into being in that trance. When I go out of the trance, I actually have to get back into it to even understand my own book. And um, not everybody is like that. I've always written that way, but some people, and most of the authors that I brought into inner traditions, set out to write a book about something, and and they know what it is they're going to write about, and they lay it out. I more don't know completely what it is I'm going to write about. I have intuitions of things that are at the edge of kind of consciousness and at the edge of the culture. And I use I use writing almost as a divination, or even as a kind of jazz form, to see what I can bring into being. So at a particular point, there were these animals that kept appearing, and I didn't question their relevance. I just looked for a way to include them in the book, in and not even in the book, but include them in the kind of scroll of writing that I was doing, and then I would shape it into a book. So, on the one hand, I focused on crows and octopuses because they seem to represent um, high forms of intelligence that were operating outside the human network. Um, and I was shocked by the movie on octopuses. My octopus teacher, I had peripherally thought about octopuses, but I had no idea of the depth of kind of invertebrate intelligence that you could have an invertebrate consciousness that achieved a very high level in its own terms. And that kind of was a window in which I began thinking about the virus itself as a form of intelligence, and then the microbiome, the notion that we're kind of a compilation of many other intelligences that through millions, if not billions of years, have kind of assembled and exist within our consciousness. Um, I remember way back in the 80s when started to do embryology books, when I was partly earning a living by getting advances from publishers to write kind of history of science, esoteric history of science books. Um, I guess, obviously we all know that we're made up of cells, but it never really struck me in a personal sense until I began working on that book that the um, that the kind of living units that make us up are living and independent themselves, and have incorporated themselves in this system, which we regard in terms of our own ability to have agency and volition, without even thinking about them and the fact that on their own level they have also agency and volition within us, and that our consciousness is in some sense a collective thing. Um, those are among the things that interest me. And,
What's up with octopuses? Is it an alien? It kind of seems like one.
yeah, well, it's an interesting idea to play with. Well, the thing that I've seen played with that I found most interesting was the idea that some some DNA or RNA related molecules landed in the ocean and merged with some sort of oyster. Um, and that the oyster then proceeded to evolve in an alien fashion. And there's a lot of semi-science about that. Um, um, it's it's to me it's not even that important whether it's true or not, because it's not provable one way or the other. We're never going to get to the bottom of it. But in thinking about it, we then think about, well, what's intelligence anyway, or what is an octopus? Is it a terrestrial animal, or could it be um, a kind of interstellar animal? And then you could ask the same thing about us. Well, where did the material that makes us come from, and did some of that um, come from other worlds, just again within the physical universe? And
Yes.
that's not even getting into the larger question, which interests me in this book and others, which is uh, are we really simply like a nest within a series of dimensions, and that our own consciousness and consciousness itself travels from dimension to dimension, and none of this is real or any more real than anything else. Um, Again, it's just sort of like cells. It's very striking to me that the long time, centuries long search for what lies at the bottom of everything ultimately ended up with there being nothing, nothing but energy and curvature, and it's where the Dreamtimes comes into the title of my book. Um, it's the reality is not that different from how a dream would look. If if you were in a dream and trying to see what made up the dream, you would ultimately find it was made up of nothing. It was made up of energy of thought forms that were turning into each other. And but the reality we have isn't all that different from that. It's made up of energy, and our role in creating it and projecting it and imagining it is kind of uncertain. How much of it we make, both short term and long term, by our projections, and how much of it is like this external algorithm that's creating us.
And isn't there some things with octopuses like predicting things? Did you come across anything like that? Where like I've seen they like predict the sports outcomes and weird stuff. Is there any
No,
validity to
no,
that?
no. Do they do that?
It's an alien. It's a prophet. I've seen weird stories like that. I don't know how credible they are. I keep thinking of this show on sci-fi called Resident Alien with Alan Tudyk. That's hilarious about a guy that's an alien that shapeshifts, but he comes across an alien octopus in a restaurant and it's in the aquarium. They're gonna eat it, and they start talking, and he frees it, runs down the street with it. But it's really good. Resident Alien.
That's like the comic book form. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
that's
that's a real form too. I mean, when I talk about crows, I talk about Heckle and Jekyll too, which are kind of
yeah.
crows.
And Resident Alien is originally a comic, of course. That's usually the case for most shows these days. One show I started recently, The Sandman, which is by Neil Gaiman, and those are comics. That has a lot of deep imagery of dreams and death and life, and he goes to hell and has to fight Lucifer, and it's really good. But a lot of imagery of wild things in it. But crows, I've always found them fascinating. I mean, I've helped a baby crow escape a garage that got trapped once, and I could have swore it came back, and you would fly by and you'd know that was the crow.
Hmm.
And I'd let it out of the garage. But what else can you share about crows? Have you had any crow experiences yourself?
Just minor ones, like in this current house, which we moved to a couple of years ago during the pandemic. Uh, we're in Bar Harbor now in Maine. There are a lot of crows in the backyard, and I put it's supposed to be a compost pile, but it's really like a crow feeding bin because we don't bury it. And I just watched them come. As I wrote that part of the book, I was watching the crows and kind of trying to tell them about what I was writing, um, and knowing that I couldn't really tell them, and in a shared language, I just thought about that some and watched as they conducted their own business in their own language. Um, and having read that they have a full language with like a few hundred words, and that all of these little noises they're making are like sentences. So I'll just sit and watch them and think about how they're conducting a universe in their own terms. And and just the moment that you open to that, it kind of flows in. I'm sort of interested in how you receive that. So in that sense, it was like I asked them to help me write that section, um, and and I don't know again what the reality of that is, but I've in the last 15 years mainly I've done enough psychic work that I feel almost I feel a lot of things are possible, not only possible, but likely, that maybe 20 years ago I would have thought were interesting, that probably marginally possible. But um, and then I've said, is that me? Have I progressed in my own practice and vision so that I can see that more, or is the world actually shifting so that it's becoming more psychic? And if that's so, like you were saying, well, I hope things improve, and basically we're saying that. But I think part of the reason that things are this difficult is because there is such a strong reaction against, I get what some people think of as the Aquarian age. You could name it a number of things, but there's a reaction against shifting to another form of consciousness, where we're in tune with a whole different part of of creation itself. And I think that there are a lot of people who are really scared of that because they're so invested in this reality. It's like having a bank account and suddenly having the money in the account declared void, worthless. Um, well, if it's only a bank account, you're still alive, and even if you end up homeless on the street, it's not the ultimate decision. But if it's the reality itself, if the reality itself and all your motivations in relation to the reality are kind of um, just declared obsolete, then you might want, for instance, a war in order to get you out of it. In the other book, which I'm continuing to write, the companion book, Return of the Tower of Babel, lately I've toyed with the idea that Trump and Putin are different versions of the same person, and I made a whole list of the ways in which they're similar. But I've thought about this. I've thought about the role that tedium and boredom plays in people's actions in a very deep way. Like, if you get really bored with what's happening, or you feel that the reality of it is slipping away, and your meaning as an individual is slipping away, and you have the power, for instance, to not only make a war but find a historical justification for it, like Putin. It's like that's a really big burst of new reality that then pulls everybody's attention to it and reaffirms your own value and power and stuff. And then that's kind of true of, all those kind of redneck Russian people who are saying, threatening England, well, we can wipe you out with one bomb in 5 minutes. And how is that different than what's being tossed around on the internet here? But all of it seems to be driven by the fact that the alternative is really scary to people, um, and that it's fear driven. Speaking of watching stuff, well, lately what I've been watching, just because it's right there, all this stuff is flowing across the whatever you call it, the media sphere. I've been watching the rather irritating investigation of Skinwalker Ranch,
Oh yes, I'm very familiar with that for sure. I've read the
where a whole
article.
bunch of kind of people who pretend to be cool and sort of big shots walk around kind of pretending that they're doing this investigation, and they even pay some homage to spirits, to Navajo spirits, and to the energies that they're working with. But it still seems like it seems really fake, and it seems as though whatever's happening there is just playing them. It's
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
with
I
their
mean,
cowboy hats and their whole
their supercomputer named Satan. Is that a good idea too? Just weird little things like that. I've read the book, the first book, and there was a second book recently. I don't know if you saw it, but I haven't. I just haven't read it. It's called Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, and it has George Knapp and the dude that wrote the first book, Colin something something. The first book's Hunt for the Skinwalker, but they claim that they released a bunch of UFO documentation, and they claim also that some of the government representatives that came out there from the government had phenomenon follow them home from there,
Yeah, yeah.
but things like that.
The hitchhikers, yeah.
And the big thing, though, that I wonder, and I see where you're coming from with the show, because the last season I saw was the first season, and it ended with they're going to collaborate with the government spooks again. It's like that's just getting weirder and weirder. But the thing is, what's up with the radiation stuff there? That's what I can't figure out. Is there a nuke buried there or something? Like they're getting wounds and head wounds, and
Yeah.
definitely seems dangerous too.
Well, it seems to me that when you're dealing, and this is to me, it's completely continuous with UFOs. If you're dealing with like lesions in this dimension, that when you begin messing with them, stuff is going to flow in, and you can call it what you want. You can call it UFOs or shapeshifters, or well, I could go on. I mean, there are a whole lot of possibilities. Synchronicities enter into this as well, and it finally just feels like a whole different system. There's a different system, a different way that meaning itself is being organized, and so it'll show up as radiation, or it'll show up as like a cattle mutilation. In the part of the sequence I watched, it was implied that who was mutilating the cattle were not UFOs, but these kind of like what would you call them? Like almost like trans-dimensional werewolves that flicker electronically in and out of this reality, and they're like giant cats or cat-like forms. Well, to me, that's no different from a UFO. A UFO is skirting across this dimensional framework just at another level in another way.
Yes.
And I mean, I think we're mostly still moored in our old reality. I mean, we conduct business day to day like that, but all this stuff is hovering around and manifesting in different ways, and it's poking into the common consciousness. In the other book, which again crosses over into this book a bit, I use some of this in here in Dreamtimes and Thoughtforms. I try and address the whole QAnon thing from the standpoint that people have gotten tired of. I mean, I'm trying to look at it in the most sympathetic way, and not all of it am I sympathetic to. But what I am sympathetic to is the idea that reality is being manipulated by scientists, by politicians, to their own goals, to their own ends. And the way they manipulate it is to pretend to not be manipulating it, to pretend to be just presenting reality, to presenting facts. And I think COVID presents a really good example of that, because there are no real sustained facts. There just are a bunch of politicized opinions being thrown out about both the origin, the nature, both the origin and nature, but also the treatment, the seriousness, and the vaccines, of course. All of that's just being thrown out. So then you have these people coming back, throwing other realities back, many of which are completely fabricated, but they have force and power. And so what I see the people saying, I've always thought the letter Q was a very powerful letter. And what people are going all the way back to Robert Graves' The White Goddess, where he talks of the origin of the letter Q and the court tree and stuff. I think that that's a part of it. And I think a part of it is cargo cults. You get a cargo cult like a ghost dance or something. And these are attempts to counter an official reality, which is essentially being forced on people.
Yes.
And you know,
It's
let me leave
yeah.
say you go.
Oh, what I was going to say, and then Putin's using Z. It seems to tie into this weird movement that puts Trump, Putin, and that Z on the same team, like battling the New World Order. And QAnon kind of seems like a Putin kiss ass or something weird. Like there's something going on. Like the Russians make QAnon. I know I've heard different things, but it's all crazy. And it's one step away from Jim Jones and the Kool-Aid, pretty much. For
Yeah,
sure. It's
except
scary.
remember when Jim Jones and the Kool-Aid happened, it seemed crazy.
Yeah.
Now it doesn't. Now it just seems like what's happening
It's
at all different levels. I don't know what you do. I mean, partly you live your life, you find things to do that are interesting, but since this is a forum in which we talk about ideas and people write books. I mean, I write books. I even asked that question. Why do I write books? I've been doing it since I was 16 years old. Um, I started in, what was the year? The year was 1960, and I started writing. And I've done it ever since. And my justification for it finally is not the books. It's the fact that it's a daily meditation on a shifting reality. It's an esoteric process. And for me, it's kind of a substitute for meditation. Um, I prefer it to. I like quiet too, but my mind's not very quiet. So I can get it quiet better by forcing myself to focus in and write. And the writing has changed. I've written about very different things over the years, but the process is the same, which is to meditate on to meditate and try and find a rhythm and almost like jazz again. It's like finding an intrinsic rhythm in things that then become somewhat self-generating, and that's a lot what the books I write are like to me. And when I finish them, I kind of move on because I can go back, like years later, I'll go back and read something. Recently, I've been reading some really early stuff from that I wrote, well, I guess from the like later 60s, the first kind of stuff I had published, which was a sort of experimental prose, books published by Black Sparrow Press, which was also publishing Bukowski then. And I functioned as a kind of beat poet writing prose.
Yeah.
And reading that over, I can see the beginnings of what I'm doing now. Um, I I don't have as many. I don't have as much material. I'm only like 21 years old or so. If I don't have as much experience or material, but I am writing one book. I'm writing that I've been writing since 1977, and haven't finished it. It's 900 pages long now. But in it, I try and track the changes from decade to decade through stories and experiences, and I wrap it around romance and relationship, around the relationship between me and my wife, which began when we were 18. Um, and I just finished spending 2 months on that book. And in it, I go back and I actually quote some of the things I wrote in the 60s in order to recreate in their own terms what it felt like then. And, and, and it still strikes me as really strange that I lived in such a different time. It's like living on a different planet, or it's like a past life that I lived. Everything was so different, and the same things that are happening now that were happening then meant totally different things. like even a baseball game. If you watched the baseball game then, it was a totally different game than the game now. And these shifts occur, and they're generally unacknowledged, or they may be acknowledged incidentally, but they seem much more fundamental than that.
Definitely. Well, let's let Jay get a question or so in there for a minute. I like to try to balance it out. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, I got a couple right now. I'll probably get some more as we talk. I was reading the preface, and maybe I read it wrong, so I didn't get you to clarify it. There's a paragraph in there about bardos, which, number one, I didn't know about, because I'm not too familiar with the whole ethereal plane traveling and the bridges between dimensions and whatnot. But you mentioned, and I hope I don't pronounce it wrong, proprioception altering illnesses, epileptic, migrainoid, and other seizures. In that paragraph, are you saying that these types of, and you have like 10 bullet points in this paragraph, are you saying that these different types of things that you mentioned, and these are 5 and 6 on those bullet points, they help you see these bridges to other dimensions?
I'm partly saying that the idea that the bridges occur between lifetimes has to be taken into account. What has to be taken into the same account is we make such bridges during this lifetime, and we don't. We shift our state of consciousness and being. Like if you have a migraine, or if you have COVID for that matter, your consciousness shifts. The whole meaning of your existence shifts. I think that it shifts in a coma. It certainly shifts overnight in a dream, and it shifts with moods. In a given mood, you see exactly the same thing in a totally different way. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are all different Bardo-like shifts within this reality. They may be very minor, but they're real. They're substantial. In this other long book that I'm talking about, unpublished book called Episodes in Disguise of a Marriage, I try and think about attraction, like when somebody's attracted to somebody else, mm-hmm. or has an amorous relationship with them. That's a Bardo state, and in some ways, it's a jointly created Bardo state, which makes it kind of interesting, because these shifts in consciousness tend to be personal, and maybe the reason sex is so interesting to people is it involves Bardo shifts that are shared, and not only shared but co-created and created by people at each other's vibration, at each other's frequency. Those are themes I'm working with in that book, not this book, but it's the same territory.
In a proprioception altering illness, is that like COVID, or is it?
Yeah, maybe. I'm struck by how books are fixed. It's in type. That's it. I'm not sure. I think the word proprioception is a lot to ask people to handle. I might not have called it that today if I'd written that sentence today. But, proprioception is not a bad word for the experience of. It's a little more than perception. It's like It's like perception, phenomenology. It's like the way in which sensual experience and cognitive experience come together from moment to moment. And the poet who was really influential to me in my youth, Charles Olson, loved that word proprioception as a kind of almost like a key to the music of his own writing. So it comes more easily to me than maybe it should. But so I mean, like mind shifts of mind that are caused by diseases, I guess, and that thing. certainly COVID, when COVID first arrived, that was one of the most striking things about it, was that people went into this completely unknown realm. It was like Halloween suddenly. It was like truly vampire attack. This disease, which was said to come from bats, perhaps, was in fact very vampire-like on a cellular level, and it was going right into people's blood and shifting them in some ways, vampirizing them, turning them into its own different mode of consciousness. So
I think it also, the other thing it did was, in my experiences, I work in a I'll just say a major home improvement store, so we were allowed to remain open throughout the entire, the whole 2 years worth of it, and I was in the state of Maryland, and the governor basically shut the state down. He said, "Don't go out unless you have to. Don't go out to walk your dog, or no, you could go out to walk your dog, go to the store for prescription drugs, to the doctor, and to the medical, and to a necessary job." But no one listened. Everybody in the entire state came to our home improvement store to buy things they didn't need, like mulch and plants. And every once in a while you get the one guy whose toilet exploded and he came to get a new toilet. That's a necessity. I can understand that, but you're quarantined, and it came. So I think it changed people's perception in the fact that they're invulnerable. Yet all these people came out, and more people got it because they just didn't pay any attention. So I see where you're going with the proprioception thing there. Now, the title of the book, Dreamtime. Now, there's the thing with the Aboriginals where they call it the dreaming or the Dreamtime. Yeah. Are we talking the same thing there? Because the Aboriginals dream about, like, I think extraterrestrials, but some think they're gods. But the Aboriginals didn't revere them as gods. They revered them as just super beings, like superheroes or comic book heroes. But they were real to them. They weren't, like you go to the myths of Greece and Rome. We don't have proof that Zeus was around, or Jupiter or Apollo, any of those guys. So are we talking about a group of aliens that have altered perception and or altered life on the planet?
I really wasn't. I was more thinking about the origin of religion itself, and the fact that that the Australian Aborigine are probably conducting what is closest to the original religion on Earth. And in that religion, the entire geography is, in a certain sense, sung into being. It's sung into being by plants, animals, stones, us. And so the song lines, they're called. They're sung into being by us together. And that notion is very close to my heart, that this is a collective reality. This is a reality that we're collectively generating, and that it's really complex, because it would have to be to include the consciousness of every creature generating it. It way outstrips anything Stephen Hawking ever thought of as like what reality is, because he left consciousness out of it. So I think of the in this day and age, I don't think you want to try and appropriate the Australian Aborigine Dreamtime. It's an Australian Aborigine system of telepathy and of migration and of hunting and of the sacredness of the landscape. But the word itself is passed out of Australian Aborigine culture, where I guess it's called Alturinga, and it's moved into culture at large. So now every culture has its version of the Dreamtime, and does things that they call Dreamtime things, and they're not Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime things, but they're parallel. And in that chapter, I kind of guess at what some of the things we do that are most Dreamtime like astral projection, and other forms of attunement that we have. that from which we create very Dreamtime-like blocks of meaning. And so I use it in that sense. I've been working for Inner Traditions for about 2.5 years. And I've been very close to the publisher, Ehud Sperling, and his main initiation that he talks of is during the time he spent with the Australian Aborigine, helping to develop the book on what was it called? I can't quite remember the title of it now, but it's something like Visions of the First. It's not. This isn't titled, but something of the First Day. And he had this experience on a hunt where they killed the emu. They killed an emu, and then they immediately lay down beside it and thanked it and invited it into the tribe. And that just had a huge impact on him. It was like a revelation. The religion is hundreds of thousands of years older than like the Vedas. That hominids, and human beings have been practicing this thing, and I thought of the Dreamtime and the song lines as being sort of it's called Voices of the First Day. That's kind of like the original religion, or at least the closest that we can get to it.
Yeah, it seems to me that it's more of a reality than of a mythology, because they don't talk about them as, when people talk about like the old religions, especially if they're a member of a religion currently, they talk about it in sort of a way of like awe. But the Aborigines, they're like, it's like they were just hanging out with people that were just superhuman, and they did nothing about it, And I don't know how many other cultures do what they do in the hunting with the emu you talked about. I know the American Indians did that, but I'm thinking most of Europe. And when we came over from Europe to here, we didn't do any of that kind of thing. When we killed an animal, we didn't like go up to it and pray with it or thank it for its meat or whatever it's offering it to us after we kill it. We just went through and just wiped out almost the entire bison herd, and does that cause harm?
Are you asking or saying?
Yeah, I think it does.
Yeah, I mean, but now we end up with factory farms, and from a socioeconomic standpoint, it may be justifiable or seem justifiable, but on a spiritual or karmic framework, we're just building up a lot of debt. And I'm afraid that some of what we're seeing now is just blowback. It's like psycho-spiritual blowback.
Yeah, karma in a way. Yeah,
it doesn't come in the form you expect it. It never does. Nothing in the universe that's working at a deep level ever manifests as what it is, because it's coming from way deeper, and so it picks its form. And that's what we're saying about like Skinwalker Ranch and shapeshifters too. If we're dealing with something that's extra dimensional, it's not going to come by invitation or accept the means of interaction that we choose. It's just going to completely behave rogue as it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think we have much of a at least let's just say the Western world anyway. Not necessarily us three, but it doesn't seem they have much of a concept of what harm can come from what's been going on. And just as a side note, I don't know if you've ever had emu before. I was in college. Huh?
Maybe once a long time ago.
I had it once a long time ago. It was fantastic. My boss at the time, I was in college. I worked at the largest beer store in Savannah, Georgia. And so my boss every year in like February, January, he had a wine tasting, and each year he would choose a new charity to all the proceeds would go to. And every year the Chart House of Savannah was there, and the hotel we were in, their they had a really good chef. He had a table. Chart House had a table. And there were other food places around. Chart House always had a prime rib. The hotel guy always had 2 or 3 different things. But this one year he had emu. He also had some venison dishes, but he had emu done like a prime rib. So I went over and I tried the roast at the Chart House table. It was okay. Tried the prime rib emu, and I was like, wow. So I would go over and get the emu from the hotel's food table, go over to the Chart House table, and steal their buns and horseradish sauce. It's the only bird animal that has red meat. It was really weird. But if you ever have a chance to get it, get it ethically. It's yummy.
Yeah.
And earlier you mentioned the letter Q. Now I'm not sure if I'm right on this, but correct me if I'm wrong. Is not the Q like the origin of the Q? Isn't it the Ouroboros, like the snake eating its tail kind of thing?
Well, I'm sure there are multiple origins. I just brought in a book to Inner Traditions on the multiple origins of alphabets. And that'll be out in another year. But the one version I'm thinking of is just the Robert Graves Celtic alphabet, the tree alphabet, in which each letter represents a tree or a fruit, and the Q comes from the apple tree, the quart tree, and it represents the original question of Adam and Eve in the garden, in a sense, the forbidden knowledge. Mm-hmm. And thus, so many words that come through Latin begin with Q, question words like quis, quod, quidni. It's been a long time since I took high school Latin, but I remember. And and then quasars and quantum and all these things seem to just eat up the Q. So I think some of the power of QAnon is just the power of Q. It's just the letter Q has a subliminal effect that transcends. It's like keying people to the fact that something more is going on. I was musing before I added the chapter on Ukraine to that other book. I closed it with the QAnon. It seemed like one of the more fantastic, like Ehud, the publisher of Inner Traditions, says because I brought in books that have used some QAnon stuff. He says, I don't mind publishing shit, but let's publish good shit, not bad shit. And meaning boring shit, like the stuff that everybody keeps repeating. But I thought that the people who gathered in Dallas to welcome JFK Jr. back, that was pretty interesting. Not because of the attempt to produce these political hybrids and reincarnate political figures as each other for essentially sectarian purposes, but just the idea that the spirits still exist and they can remanifest. And I said they weren't, when they gathered in Daley Plaza, where JFK was assassinated, and they're mixing JFK with JFK Jr. with a little bit of Elvis thrown in. And I think it's not that they're wrong, it's just that they're like a few thousand years too early. If the Earth survives and progresses, it'll move more into collective consciousness, and entities will cross over back and forth. So if you need to bring somebody back for a particular reason, well, it's not that you bring back the personality, but you can bring back the energy, and you can bring back the oversoul or some aspect of that, and that will represent a new and probably more functional culture than the one we've got now, where it's just material. It's super materialism, and everybody who's in materialism is having a good time, And then when they get kicked out of materialism, they're dead and gone, and that's that. And spirits are not allowed in, but if they do get allowed in, they make sort of like entry points for them and stuff. I I, I'm kind of taken with anything which attempts to smash the current reality, but then on the other hand, in this polarized astral, under this polarized astral pavilion, some of it is pretty mean spirited and ugly. Um, By the way, watching stuff on TV, I mean, all these kind of weird documentaries. I watched one a couple of weeks ago. I didn't even know what it was. It was called something like The Most Hated Man on the Internet. Did you see that one?
I haven't seen that.
I knew nothing about this whole phenomenon. It was like in 2011, 2012. It was the birth of revenge porn. And this guy who had a website, I think it was called Is Anybody Up? And I tend to forget more. What was his name? Something more. It was a forgettable name. He ended up in jail finally. I mean, the FBI eventually shut him down. But what he kind of crossed this line in which he just made everything possible, and it was all like under the rubric of revenge porn. It was stealing people's material from their cell phones and then putting it up on the internet and having people mock, ridicule them. And it drove some, and particularly women, of course, and it drove some to point of suicide, and in fact, some suicides because of it. And then when anybody tried to come after him, he like mobilized all his fans, which were certainly in the hundreds of thousands, maybe in the millions. They were called the family. And they then began threatening people. And everybody was scared of them. Even it took the FBI even some work to get over their own reticence to go after him. And and I didn't know anything about this. This was all 2011, 2012 into 2013, and then he got put in jail. But it occurred to me, well, that never went away. He just exploited it. And it's not just the revenge porn, it's that people are now experimenting with the fact of, well, why should there be a limit on anything? There are no limits. I can have as many guns as I want. I can shoot as many people as I want. I can say whatever I want or make up whatever I want.
Yeah, without repercussions.
Yeah. Now, agreed, we may not want that. But what I'm saying is it's also an energy. It's an energy in and of itself that has arisen because it's arisen in reaction to something. And what I see it in rising in reaction to is this reign of elite knowledge, of knowledge being imposed on people and being used politically to kind of put them in their place and making a mistake. And I'm on the wrong side of that. I'm educated, I have knowledge, but I don't think that is a free pass for me. I don't think that guarantees me anything in the bigger picture. So I look at these other people, they don't have access to that knowledge and they can't juggle it in the way I've been taught to over the years. So instead, they find other ways to weaponize information and to fight back against the imposition of facts, of the use of fact, and then QAnon was a perfect. The pandemic was a perfect opportunity because I don't know where you guys stand on the vaccine thing, but I don't have the vaccine. And
I don't have it.
And don't intend to get it. I do take a whole bunch of stuff every day, homeopathic stuff, herbal stuff, and some supplements. And it's not that I feel immune, but I've had a lot of exposure and haven't gotten it. And other people who have gotten the vaccine have gotten it. And everybody else in my family has gotten the vaccine. My wife, my kids, their kids. So I'm out there alone on it. I just have my family was pretty messed up in childhood. I've never trusted the adults. Um, they have they've always seemed to me unreliable. And on this one, that vaccine didn't feel right from the beginning.
Yeah, and there was I don't know the guy's name. There was a former doctor, and I don't know if he was a surgeon general but he was some sort of like a government vaccine stooge, and he actually came out and said that the three vaccines that have mRNA in them, he says that he was one of the guys on the forefront of making mRNA. He said it's not tested to the point where we don't know what it does to people still. And they're like, oh, it's safe. If you don't know what this mRNA does, so I don't understand why they push it. But yeah, I agree with you. I'm not going anywhere near those.
Yeah, they know short term. They know something short term, but they don't know long term. And it's not taken enough into consideration the fact that in the old days, when you had to make a vaccine, you really had to work at it. You had to work with experiments in nature to try and get the sort of reaction you wanted using biological material. And then this pandemic comes along, and they don't have any patience at all. And it's like, we've got all these machines. We've got CRISPR. We've got, we can just duplicate. We can just make up what we need. We don't even need live stuff. Let's just manufacture it. And well, it's difficult for people it doesn't survive. Well, we'll just freeze it. We'll put it in this graphene oxide solution. And so then you end up with this ridiculous kind of paradox. It's clearly the Donald Trump vaccine. He's the one who, it was done the way he does things. He threw a lot of money at it, tried to, I joked to, it's like he always wanted the biggest bimbo and the fastest machine. So, he got this vaccine. But then the moment that the Democrats came in, it became their vaccine. And they immediately used it as the bellwether of science to then herd everybody into taking it, herd, shame, threaten, terrify, without any reason and with any justification, and with no warning that this was really quickly thrown together, and it was created by a whole new method of just, there are like, at this point, I think 300 or 400 of these vaccines worldwide, because everybody can make their own. It's like a video game in that sense. You just, you turn on your machine and you manufacture the version you want, and you call it a vaccine. But the virus also, they're not completely nailing it. So it just keeps evolving. It keeps mutating. And that hasn't happened with other vaccines in the same way, because there I'm getting into microbiology over my head. But anyway, I do deal with this somewhat in this book, because I write about the microbiome and the nature of viruses and the intelligence of viruses, all of which is interesting in its own right.
Well, first of all, a virus, once it gets into you, it sort of already kind of rewrites your DNA to begin with, whether it's the flu or chickenpox or whatever. Am I not correct on that?
Yeah, it does. It kind of it copies. It sort of becomes like a Trojan horse. It masquerades as you and copies your material, but uses it for its own its own
nefarious purposes.
well, I don't know. It's not nefarious from its standpoint, and it's not. One questions whether something that simple even has consciousness. But since I think even a stone has rudimentary consciousness, I imagine
Right.
a virus.
I got the first one, 666 implant. No, I uh I had saw this story about this guy that had testicular cancer and he got COVID and croaked, and I freaked out. My mom got it. She's like, get the virus. I mean, get the vaccine. So I got the first one, but I have not got the boosters. I'm probably not going to because I wish I didn't, but I didn't get it. But I haven't had any really adverse side effects. Had some paranoia that I am, but I got the first one. I'm not getting the others. It just seems like a circus. Like there's a new one every time you fart.
Basically.
And then I see all this crazy stuff on Before It's News, this right wing stuff about like living weird organisms are inside you now. If you got not the Pfizer one, but the other one, I forget what it's called. But there's like these serious radio hosts talking about they found like an alien amoeba inside of people and crazy stuff. Like I can't even keep up with it anymore.
Yeah. Well, even when I find that even when it's not accurate as science, it's accurate as metaphor, and it's capturing this invasive reality. In the other book, the unpublished book, Return of the Tower of Babel, in my chapter on COVID and the vaccine, I have a section called "The Vaccine is Not the Problem with the Vaccine," which to me means the problem with the vaccine is it's the whole technocracy. It's the notion that we have to create a solution to everything, and that our solution is always going to be, we have such a down payment in the infrastructure now that we can't risk having a complete like civilizational collapse. So we get more and more wed to not so much this vaccine, but the entire technocracy and everything that it's offering. I quoted that old Tennessee Ernie Ford song, 16 tons, I owe my soul to the company store. It's like at a certain point, you just owe your existence to the technocracy and you're just herded through it. And so reality and nature have been replaced by this superstructure, which is meant to feed, heal, preserve you, cure anything. I mean, it's like, oh my God, there's this wild virus loose, fix it. Ultimately, the world of nature is much too large for us to keep fixing it. And I think that we're missing a key part of our relationship to the natural world if we keep inventing. And I mean, it's also nature. I mean, anything we make is natural because we're natural and we're using natural materials. But, well, I don't want to get off into that.
Yeah. One thing I want to bring up is I know we talked about UFOs some, but my story, and I know I've told you this a long time ago, so it's been a while, and I tell this story too much, I know. But the thing that got me doing the show was when I was 17, I had testicular cancer. And then I went through chemo, lost one in the war, woke up from exploratory surgery and told we took a nut and you got to go through chemo at 17. I cried. I went through chemo, and then everything was fine, besides the psychological damage of it all. And then a few years later, my dad died. Well, I started to have a lot of weird experiences, from seeing UFOs with witnesses to seeing different kinds of beings, completely sober. Sometimes I was not. I was partying and doing stupid stuff. But there were times where I had seen different things, different types of beings with witnesses. And I had friends say, Jeffrey, you're attracting these UFOs here because of you. And they were standing right next to me looking at crazy, weird things in the sky, like energy orbs and spears that just looked bizarre. And so that led me to do the show. And when I first started doing the show, it was a little chat room where people just typed. There was no audio, and I had people like Stanton Friedman, nuclear physicist, there. He stayed on the phone with me, so I helped him do everything. And what had happened at first is I had trouble getting interviews, and I said a prayer, and I had a UFO sighting of some red, like weird energy things in the sky. I don't know what they were, but next thing you know, I'm on the phone with like Stanton Friedman and Nick Pope and the dude from UFO Hunters. It was like a connection. Like, I don't know if aliens helped me or what. But my point is, I come to the conclusion that this is about raising consciousness. And I think, I know a lot of your writing is definitely about that, your books. It's something that we touch on, trying to open people up to this stuff. And that's what your whole, a lot of your books are about, in this book for sure. But one big thing that I've seen, and I've had people on from the shamanic paths from different tribes and, different things like that. And we've talked about luminous beings of light. A few times I've seen some beings of light in the heavens, like they had left my home and came out of it and flew into the heavens. And I was completely sober, not even tobacco or anything. And it was kind of like maybe my suffering opened up to see what we are, energy beings, and the heavens, like that quantum realm where we may go when we die, that's around the earth, and things like that. But I know it's about raising consciousness, is my point. But one thing, I know you have a being of light story in your book that's kind of it sounds like it's more of a con situation or something. Was it an experience that happened where someone was trying to stage a being of light or something like that?
Oh, that was a dream.
Oh, a dream. Okay, okay.
Dream.
I know it was something about being of light.
That section of the book, it was like the closest thing I came to a new version of the sort of writing I used to do in the 60s and 70s. I go back and forth between this dream and reality and all the illusions in the dream and the reality. And it was a real dream. There was this really dark phase for me when that went for about two plus years. It went from mid-June 2018 till October 2020, in which everything turned dark. And it followed, my sister committed suicide, and she had followed my mother and brother in committing suicide. So it was like I was in the same cult with them, and I didn't take it the same way. I didn't have I wasn't drawn in that direction, but the darkness was still there, and I just would push it away. And then at a certain point, a series of events occurred, and I just had to deal with it. And it was pretty terrible. And that dream occurred during that, and it was a mix of all these. I dreamed of these various psychic people I knew, and then there was this being of light who was sort of a fraud. She was being pushed on stage to pretend to be a being of light, but in being pushed on stage and faking it, she became it. And then the whole sequence became about how do we, within our own life, there are so many like numinous things and then make-believe things, and the things that guide us are often the things that seem least likely to guide us. But that's why we're able to be guided by them, because we haven't figured them all out, and they don't let us figure them out. They just guide. And so I was touching on that a little bit by putting in that dream. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the particular, I think I was in that passage, that really dark passage, when I did the last interview with you, and we really, unless I'm remembering a different interview, because I did maybe 25 interviews when my book Bottoming Out the Universe came out. I know I did one with you, and I think it was yours. Did you have a woman in New York?
Yes, Wham. Yeah, sure did.
Yeah. So that was a very powerful, that was of all the ones I did, the most powerful, because it was during the time that we talked that I sort of went through the kind of the darkness that I'd been in. I experienced both the darkness and the light in that show. And I was still transitional. I hadn't come out of it entirely yet. Um, and and but it was a really powerful experience. And during the time when I was in the darkness, we had left. I'm not a Californian at heart or in any other way, yet we lived there for 38 years, and I developed a publishing company there, and we'd raised our kids there, and they stayed Californians. Like our son is a California environmental biologist, and our daughter's kind of definitely an indie movie star in LA and director. Um, but we, in 2014, we came back to northern New England, which just seemed that at that stage of our life, hitting 70, it was like, get us out of here, get us out of California. It suddenly, I realized, well, none of this is real. None of this is what it seems. And it's just been like this great mirage. It worked. Um, but then, but then when I went into the darkness, we both kind of went into this darkness. So we went back there in 2019 into 2020, which is when I did the talk with you and your person in New York. And then we went, and then in mid-June of 2020, and I write about this a little bit in Dreamtimes and Thoughtforms, we just came back to Maine and then ultimately relocated in Bar Harbor, which is a real spiritual center of Maine where there's a lot of psychic energy. And I really felt it immediately, and it was totally during COVID. I think we were really lucky to be able to slip in here. And I restarted the psychic group I had here. And all sorts of interesting people came to the psychic group. A lot of young people, a lot of people early 30s was about, our kids were just here last week from California, and we had a party in the backyard, and they remarked that the average age was younger than most of their parties because all these people who have come in through the psychic group and also through intertradition. So the other thing that happened was in that dark phase was my wife and I had developed our own publishing company starting when we were in college in the 60s. And we built it over the years, and some of those early books of mine that you interviewed me on, like Dark Pool of Light and The Night Sky, the revised Night Sky, were things I published through our own company. But then when we were back out in California, the company literally got stolen by an identity politics kind of cabal. I was very sloppy in who I hired. It was just like, well, anybody who wants to work and willing to work. And I just empowered people without regard for whether they gave a shit for what we had spent like 5 decades doing or not. And after Trump, it became, it wasn't just a matter of the right, it became something on the left too, of just like, well, do whatever you want, take whatever you want, and make up a story for it. And I think the best phrase was virtue signaling. So they decided that it was a white privilege press, and that we had to make reparation to them, even though they were mostly white. But you see, but they were sort of white, virtue signaling white, and they literally kicked. Well, Lindy had retired, but she was on the board, and they literally kicked me out of the press after essentially 55 years of doing it and building it. And then they proceeded to vandalize it, like putting out a print. They had no actual sensitivity to psychospiritual topics, just a kind of surface commercial like this is commercial, or we can sell this, that the whole soul was gone. But then they thought they made up for that by the virtue signaling, like Black Lives Matter, Native Americans, none of which they actually cared about. It's just that that's how you virtue signal. So the publisher of Inner Traditions asked me to come in and bring my people over there, which was an amazing thing to have happen after so many years. In a way, they were our main competitor. And he gave me my own list, which I called Sacred Planet Books, and a really large amount of freedom and essentially budget to work with. And I was able to do a type of publishing I was never able to do before because I never had the resources that I do at Inner Traditions. So in roughly 2.5 years since that, and this is like part of, like you were talking about, when something bad happens, there is a revelation or breakthrough. Like Ehud said, well, the only reason I can think of for this terrible thing happening to you is that you and I were meant to work together in our 70s. And that's what's happened. I brought in about 100 books in 2.5 years. And I've learned so much from these authors all over the world who come in because the Inner Traditions imprint draws more people. If you look at my website under my name, richardgrossinger.com, on my April news notes, I just made a list of all these amazing topics that I've learned about, sort of dragon energies. I'm doing a UFO book with Keith Thompson, who did the original Angels and Aliens book in the 1980s. It's called Cosmos Calling. And I've got a wonderful book from this Brazilian living in London on the spiritual evolution of animals, including insects. And I've done Matt McKay's books on the afterlife, and he was a fellow publisher in Berkeley, did New Harbinger. And when his son was murdered in San Francisco, it changed his belief system. This maybe 15 years ago, because he felt in touch with his son. And he never believed any of that before, but he's done 3 books since then, 2 of which I did with Inner Traditions, on essentially channeling his son in the afterlife. One of them is called The Luminous Landscape of the Afterlife, and the other is called Love in a Time of Impermanence. But 100 or so books is a lot. And it's really been like sort of a cornucopia of things. So, I mean, every place has its flaws, but I'm a big fan of Inner Traditions. And it's also given me a critique of how I did publishing over the years. I was never committed enough. I never really honored the truths and the mysteries that came to me, and I paid the price for that. But on the other hand, the guides were kind because they made me pay a really big price, essentially losing an entity which we had developed over our whole lifetime and given a lot of our own personal money to, including recently, to keep it going. Money that could well have been used elsewhere, given what happened. And yet, for all that, for the punishment, for essentially being such a fuck up for so long, I get this gift of being able to curate books through a much more like awakened, alive vehicle. And so that's part of what I've been doing and really enjoying. And my own books being published by Inner Traditions is a kind of side thing. The kind of vandalization of North Atlantic Books included putting my 14 books out of print that were in print and pulping them. So gradually Inner Traditions will bring them back into print, but there's no rush because they're still available in secondary markets. So why bother at this point? And so I'm doing these new books with them, and maybe we'll do. They've been debating whether the Return of the Tower of Babel is too political for them to do, but I think they're going to do it. Um, I'm just going to rewrite it so it's a little bit more metaphysical.
Cool.
It's already about chaos magic. So.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I've been working with inner traditions for like 14 years, maybe a long time, getting guests. It's been a long time. They have great guests always. Like always provide great guests and send them over. And if I want unique guests, this is definitely the best way to go for sure. No doubt about it. Love
Yeah,
it.
we went over there. I got to go over there. It's not that long a drive from Maine to Vermont, and really got to hang out with them for the first time since I joined. Um, and they gave Lindy and me a 56th anniversary party, and a lot of the authors I have from the Northeast came. And we also used to live in Vermont. We started North Atlantic Books in Vermont in the early 70s. And so it was somewhat like a homecoming, too. Um, and I just was really surprised at all the synchronicities. I have this amazing book on synchronicity that just came out in the last week or so by Bernie Beitman. Have you run into him?
Yes. He's coming on in November.
Yeah, he's great. He's like on synchronicity like no one else. He even outdoes Jung. He's just like on top of all the layers of synchronicity. Um, he's great, and he also joined the psychic group. This young psychic here. Um, I joked initially that she was like the LeBron James of young psychics. She was so good. And she just showed up at the group one night. And the second night she showed up, she said, "Would you like a reading?" And she went around to the group. We're in the backyard. There were like 11 people there. She read everybody's aura. And just really amazing things. So accurate. Um, and she described, Brittany, she's a real regional, local Maine girl who, um, when she was 17, her father, wasn't living with the family at that point, died in a fire, and she went running to see like the rest, the firemen at this building burning down, and what she experienced was soul leaving and giving her this incredible power. And since then, she has been sort of building her capacity. And, um, and I've known a lot of older psychics my age or older or in my age range, but she was the first one who's really like a rookie psychic and who has remarkable abilities and just very light. I in my writing about her, I said like she's a little bit like blueberry ice cream. She's so her psychic work is so simple and direct. But anyway, all of this has been like in its own quiet way, a sort of luminous rebirth, to be able to work for inner traditions, live in a place I call a synchronicity sinkhole, and kind of have all these new people around. Um, and it's John Friedlander, who I did this wonderful book by called Recentering Seth. I worked on it for years, transcribing from his classes. We got a cat, and he said that he would invite the oversoul of our first cat from the 60s, which is the only cat I really liked a lot. I think we had about 15 after it. He said, well, that was a psychic cat. He said he would invite the oversoul of this cat into a new cat. And I literally woke up in the middle of the night. He said, you'll get a clue. And it told me the town to go to, which happened to be the town that this woman, Brittany, came from years ago. And we actually went to this shelter there called the Ark and got this cat. And I don't know, in my April news notes on on my website, I write about this. I don't know exactly what the oversoul of a cat would look like if it came back like 40 years later, but she's doing a really good impression of it. If that's what it looks like. I have a niece who came and visited who said, "Well, is it really the oversoul of your first cat?" I said, "Well, first you'd have to know what an oversoul was, and then you'd have to know what a cat was." I don't really know either, for sure.
But I can assure you that that actually does happen. I have a cat. When I was in college, my friend's girlfriend, they found this cat, a kitten, Maine Coon, in the trash can of a McDonald's, like in the dumpster, eating McDonald's food. So they couldn't keep it. They gave the cat to me. That cat lived for 20 years. When I moved back to Maryland, she passed away. Well, going on probably like 14 years now, something like that, maybe 20. And anyway, so when I was deciding whether or not, once I found out she had like cancer, I had to decide right then. I was sitting at the bar at my favorite restaurant. Do I want to kill my best friend, or do I let her live till she suffers and dies? So while I was just debating that in my head, one of the waiters I knew came by and said, "Hey, we got this cat. Nobody wants it. You want it?" And I'm like, "What kind of cat is it?" Because it's a long-haired female black cat. And I'm like, "You're kidding." He's like, "No." I'm like, "Give me a week." So a week goes by. I have a couple days to decide my cat. So I have her put down. A week after I have the old cat put down, this new cat comes to me. So I go to the restaurant to go pick it up. The waiter and his mom were working there. They called the father husband. He drives up in a big red truck, and we go out to the back of the restaurant to wait for him. And as he drives up, this little cat, the same size as when I got her the first time, sees me through the window and tries to jump through the window. I mean, like, you see her smash her face in the window trying to get to me. And I'm like, wow, that's weird. I wonder why nobody wants this cat. Does she like claw people's eyeballs out? I take the cat home. Like immediately after that, I go straight home, take her, put her in my car, and go home. She immediately, when I got to my apartment, she knew exactly where to go for everything. She knew where the water was. She knew where the litter box was. My other cat that I had at the time, whose name was Lucifer Sam from the Pink Floyd song, I put her down on the front of the lobby of my apartment, closed the door. The other cat comes and looks at her and goes, "Hey, it's you." She goes, "Yeah, it's me. Get out of the way." She runs past him right to the food, and he looks at me like, "Can I go to the vet? I want a new body too." But it's the same cat, same personality, same habit, same. I mean, I can't go anywhere in this house with both of these cat bodies without following me wherever I went. So it happens.
Yeah, it's like that old Warren Beatty movie, Heaven Can Wait.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, I had a dog situation that I had a dog. I mean, Jack was his name. He was a beagle, Jack Russell mix, and he's with me 16 years and would walk with me every day. He smiled, but one day, of course, he passed away, and I was crying and crying. Well, before that, I was holding him in my arms and crying, and I was outside sitting in the yard holding him, and I saw a white flash of light in the sky above the trees. That was weird. I don't know what it was, but we had another white dog that passed, so we said it was her, coming to get him. But he didn't die then. He stayed for an extra week. So I spent time with him, and then finally he passed away. But that affected me on so many different levels. But recently, Christina, fiance, she found a puppy someone threw out right in front of her in a park, and she got it. Her other dog ran off the other puppy they threw out, unfortunately. But this one came home, and for some reason in its face, it looked like Jack, but it was kind of like a gold lab. It wasn't exactly like him, but there was just something about the face. And I actually had a psychic lady say, "Look at the eyes. You'll know it's him by the eyes." But this is a girl, so I call it Jackie now. And every time I look at it, I think of Jack. I don't know for sure, but there's just something weird about it. And I go, well, I hope he's not looking down and thinks I'm, replacing him. I hope it's really like his spirit. But there are weird things. If it smiles, I'll know dead on. But maybe he shows up in it. Maybe it is him. I don't know, but there's something just weird with it. Like, it looks like him.
Right. Well, animal souls are more fluid. I mean, again, we're supposedly the peak of evolution here, but we're only like one peak, and maybe there are these other creatures just are much more fluid. It reminds me of a John Friedlander line. What was it? Humans are not the only beings who are able to be enlightened. They're the only beings who need to be enlightened. Something like that was his line. Um, the Yeah, he's my main psychic teacher, and he did his look at his book Recentering Seth, because I basically put that together from his listening to maybe 200 hours of his workshops. And he had sat with Jane Roberts when she channeled Seth, so he picked up communication to. I mean, it's not Seth because Seth only came through Jane Roberts, but it's the same like multi-personhood, like combination intelligence that he was communicating with, um, and um, and that was in some ways for all the publishing other people's books over the years. That's the one that I put the most of myself into, because I thought it was nothing else like this material about like what this reality is. Um,
I saved the cover of that book earlier just so I could find it, and that Afterlife book you recommended too, just so I could find them later for sure. And so we got about 10 minutes. Jay, did you have a question you wanted to ask before we end?
I did, yeah, because we had been talking about global consciousness and our intelligence being affected by illnesses and whatnot. Do you think COVID is negatively affecting our global consciousness and our ability to possibly even migrate onto the next plane?
Well, I don't think that anything on the physical plane will affect, the next plane. I do think that it's having, I think it's having a negative impact and a positive impact. I write about what's his name, Zach. I forget his. I'd have to go look at my book to see his last name. The guy who writes about how viruses. They contribute information. They contribute evolutionary information to us, and have always done that. Mm-hmm. And that the COVID virus is a particularly good one, whether it's artificial or natural. It is putting rather powerful levels of intelligence in us that eventually will kind of humanize in terms of our own psyches and take on identities and realities. So he argues that that it isn't a bad thing, that it's just the way that the biosphere upgrades our intelligence, that with all the toxic effects and 5G and like all the Monsanto crap in the environment, that we need an upgrade in intelligence. And so he proposes that COVID might serve that function.
That would be a very positive thing.
Yeah.
Also, one of the things that's kind of bothered me sort of about the not necessarily this genre, but alternate subject books, is a lot of the female authors always talk about the sacred feminine. And somewhere in your book, I don't remember where I saw it, but somewhere in this one, you mentioned the sacred masculine. Thank you for that. Are we going to see anything more on that? Because everybody else talks about the sacred feminine.
Well, note that
few people talk about sacred masculine.
Well, there's the youngest author I brought into Inner Traditions, Sophie Strands, who may still be 27 or 28 now. She's great. She has a brand new book called The Flowering Wand, which is literally on the sacred masculine. So
awesome.
Look, check out Sophie. She's super brilliant.
She wrote the foreword to your book.
Oh, right, she did. I invited her. Yeah, I asked her to write the foreword. She she's great. She went to Bard College recently, and had as a teacher, sort of emeritus teacher, a guy who, when I was a teenager, I wasn't at Bard. We were at Amherst and Smith, but we used to visit Bard because there was this whole kind of occult salon there, and the same guy kind of educated her. How many years later? Like essentially almost 60 years later. Um, but yeah, she also did a novel that's coming out called The Magdalene Secret, which she's really good because she's an exceptional writer, an exceptional literary writer as well, and she's so articulate and charming too. So, The Flowering Wand is a good sacred masculine book to do. One thing I think of, I'm just sort of thinking about my own book, and probably the most exciting thing to me about the book, at least at this moment, thinking about it, was a dialogue I had with that friend Matt McKay I mentioned, the publisher of New Harbinger. And he told me that he proposed this thing to me when I was back out in Berkeley in 2020 when we were talking, and he was actually trying to do some past life regressions with me that were really, I don't know if they were past life regressions, but they were intense.
Mhm.
But his press purchased a press called Non-Duality Press, which was essentially a Buddhist press, and it didn't do well. And it caused him to rethink non-duality. And it was very much along my own lines because I am very not just interested in Buddhism. I think Buddhism is the most sophisticated system on the planet. But I think that Buddhism has been used to impose a weird reality, especially in the West, which is that this world here is like a disaster zone. It's like a cosmic mistake, and that the goal is to get enlightened again, is to get back in enlightenment, and to pay whatever price is necessary to get out of this false reality into enlightenment. And Matt posed it beautifully, and I really made almost a whole chapter in this book based on this, which is, well, how the fuck did this reality get here then? If it's a mistake, it's an awfully big reality. To just be here is a mistake. And his phrase was, it has to be accounted for. And I think that probably that's the biggest key to my own work and my work in this book, was while believing in the existence of higher dimensions and higher realities, this reality has to be accounted for. It has a driver behind it that's really powerful, and it doesn't do any good to just say. And that was also that dream about the being of light. I write about this. It doesn't any good. It's not a viable path to say I want out of this reality because there's a better reality, or I can perfect myself to get into a better reality. Well, how did we get into this reality to begin with, and what's it doing here? And that's probably as close to the essential story in this thread in the Dreamtimes and Thoughtforms book, is trying to think out the richness of this reality. And it's also what I did in the earlier Inner Traditions book, Bottoming Out the Universe. And it's what John does in Recenter and Set. And that's probably the most interesting theme to me because it's so forgiving. We don't have to worry about this being a hell realm that we've been consigned to because we made some huge mistake or original sin. This is the realm that we're creating. This is where we're supposed to be at this moment. And it's, I mean, there are better things and worse things you can do. That, like John Friedlander says, the universe is still working to optimize itself for our spiritual freedom every second, no matter what decision we make. We can make the worst decision in the world. It'll re-optimize the next minute. And that's true. We make some really bad decisions and do stupid things, but it reoptimizes. And so I think it's an interesting, powerful reality. And in any case, we're in it, and it's not replaceable. We can't just instantly say, okay, I want to dial in a different reality.
Yeah.
And people who try to do that end up in worse trouble.
Well, guys, we got about 3 minutes left. Richard's book is that's Richard Grossinger, Dreamtimes and Thoughtforms, Cosmogenesis from the Big Bang to Octopus and Crow Intelligence to UFOs. It's great to have you back, Richard. It's always a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, you guys. Yeah.
Everybody have a good weekend. Watch The Sandman. It's really good.
Okay.
Yeah, a weird trip for sure on Netflix. It's definitely weird, but it's good.
Yeah.
David Thewlis is in it. He's like a villain. That's pretty good.
Oh, right.
He's a good actor.
Really interesting actor.
Yeah. All right.
He was the one who did Naked, right? Years ago.
Well, yeah, it sure was. I haven't seen that, but I saw it. I saw the cover of it or something. I was like, I need to see that. It looks weird.
Dragon Slayer.
Yeah, he's been
Not
on
Dragon
a lot.
Slayer.
Watched Wim Wenders' Submergence is really powerful. But on my website, I have something called Guide to Cinema, and I've probably got like 100 movies reviewed there.
Cool. I'll have to check it out. Well, what was that called? Submergence what?
Submergence, the Wim Wenders film from 2018. It's simultaneously about life on thermal vents in the bottom of the ocean and jihad in Somalia as two darknesses emerging at the bottom of this planet.
Cool. I'll check it out for sure. All right. Well, we appreciate it so much. Thanks everybody for listening. Have a great weekend.
You
Good
too.
night, everybody.
Good night.
All right. Man, I'm tired.
Yeah, that was a good interview. We never got to UFOs really though. I wanted to get to that. We ran out of time.
It went by fast.
Yeah, it did.
All right. You staying for anything else?
I'm going to stay in for Joe's show, but I'm going to go upstairs and have a smoke first and then come back down for it.
All right.
All right.
I'll catch you later. Bye-bye.
Yep.